The room was full of lights, cameras, and whispers. A tech conference in San Francisco had gathered some of the world's brightest minds. People were waiting to hear from Sundar Pichai, the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the world. He walked in with calm steps, a quiet smile on his face. The room grew silent as he reached the stage. He looked a little tired. Maybe it was the long flights, or maybe it was the weight he carried on his shoulders. Years of leading, solving problems, answering questions, and standing for his team. But he stood tall. He adjusted his microphone and greeted everyone with warmth in his voice. "Thank you for being here. It's always a joy to speak with people who care about the future." But not everyone in the room was kind. One journalist, sitting in the front row, had a different plan. His name was Mark. He was young, loud, and full of himself. He had gone viral once for asking a rude question to a Hollywood actor, and now he wanted another moment to trend. As Sundar began explaining a new program to support young coders from rural schools, Mark interrupted. "Mr. Pichai," he said loudly, without waiting his turn. "How does a man with an accent like yours expect to lead the future of American technology?" A hush fell over the room. People shifted in their seats. The camera zoomed in on Sundar's face. For a second, he paused. Not because he was hurt, not because he was scared, but because he had heard it before. The accent, the childhood in Chennai, the long walk to school, the dreams whispered in crowded rooms. None of it had been easy, but he never complained. He worked hard. He moved forward. He took a slow breath. Then he smiled. "Thank you for your question," Sundar said calmly. "My accent is part of my journey. It tells a story of where I come from, what I've learned, and how far I've traveled. And I believe the future of technology is made stronger by stories like mine." His voice was steady, but something shifted in the room. Some people clapped, some just watched. But one person sitting quietly at the back of the room leaned forward in his chair. It was Keanu Reeves. He hadn't been announced. He wasn't part of the panel. He had come to watch, like everyone else, dressed simply. A black jacket, soft jeans, and that kind face everyone recognized. But now his eyes were locked on the stage. He had seen something in Sundar's reply. Something familiar. Keanu knew what it felt like to be misunderstood. He had been laughed at for the way he spoke, for his calm ways, for not being loud enough in a world full of noise. He had seen people judge him for being too quiet, too kind, too human. He stood up slowly, without saying a word. Meanwhile, the moderator tried to move on. "Thank you, Sundar. Next question from." But Keanu's quiet footsteps echoed as he walked toward the stage. Everyone turned. Phones lifted. Cameras clicked. Keanu didn't ask for a mic. He didn't need one. When he reached Sundar, he turned to face the audience. "You asked about his accent," Keanu said softly. "I want to ask about his strength." There was a pause. No one breathed. "You see a man on stage," Keanu continued, "but you don't see the boy who studied by candlelight, the young man who crossed oceans to learn, the leader who never shouted but always listened. That takes strength. And if we can't see that, then maybe we're not the future we're pretending to build." It was not a loud speech. It was not angry. It was honest. And it was heard. The journalist, Mark, tried to speak again, but no one was listening to him anymore. People were looking at Sundar and Keanu. Two men, one of technology, one of art, both quiet, both kind, both stronger than they looked. Sundar smiled. He didn't expect that, but he nodded at Keanu in quiet thanks. The moment didn't end with cheers. It ended with silence. The kind that means something has shifted. The kind that says people are thinking, really thinking. After the event, as people left the hall, no one spoke about the journalist's rude question. They spoke about Sundar's calm reply, and about Keanu's quiet truth. But this was just the beginning, because later that night, something happened that no one expected. Something that would take this story from one moment to a movement, and the world would never forget what happened next. The evening air in San Francisco was crisp as Sundar walked out of the building, his team close behind. There was a quiet in his steps, but not the kind that comes from defeat. It was the kind that follows a deep breath after standing tall through a storm. He had faced many questions in his life, but this one had been different, public, sharp, and meant to wound, and yet he had stayed calm. But what stayed with him most wasn't the insult. It was Keanu Reeves' unexpected kindness. As the car pulled up, Sundar looked across the street and saw Keanu standing by himself, hands in his pockets, looking out at the lights of the city. Sundar hesitated for a second, then walked toward him. "Thank you," Sundar said simply. Keanu turned, smiled softly, and replied, "You didn't need my help, but sometimes the world needs to hear someone say what's right." They stood for a moment, two quiet men in a loud world, connected by something deeper than words. "Do you have a minute?" Keanu asked. Sundar nodded. They walked down the street, away from the crowd, away from the flashing lights. They entered a small coffee shop that was nearly empty. The barista's eyes widened when she recognized them, but said nothing, respecting the mood. They sat at the corner table. Sundar stirred his tea slowly, and Keanu looked at him with calm interest. "You know," Keanu began, "when I was younger, people called me slow. They said I paused too much, talked too soft, that I didn't fit in." Sundar looked up, listening with quiet respect. "But I kept going," Keanu said, his voice even. "Not to prove them wrong, just to prove myself right. It's strange how people mistake kindness for weakness, but I've seen more courage in quiet men than in those who shout." Sundar smiled faintly. "I understand that. Where I come from, being humble is taught early. You speak less, listen more, but in some places, that's seen as lacking confidence." "It's not," Keanu said. "It's discipline." Their conversation drifted for over an hour. They talked about dreams, struggles, what it meant to lead with dignity. Two men from different worlds, but the same fight, trying to bring light without burning others. As they walked out of the cafe, a young woman approached. Her hands trembled slightly as she held out a notebook. "Mr. Pichai, Mr. Reeves," she said shyly, "I just want to thank you both. I was in the audience earlier. I never felt like I belonged in tech because of how I speak. But tonight, something changed in me." Keanu looked at her kindly. "You belong wherever you want to belong." Sundar nodded. "Don't let the noise drown out your voice." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and walked away clutching her notebook as if it held the weight of her new dreams. Later that night, as the story from the conference spread online, something unexpected happened. Keanu's single quotes were caught on video, not staged, not prepared, just real. The clip went viral, but what mattered more were the comments. "I saw myself in Sundar." Keanu said what so many of us wish we could say. "I've been mocked for my accent all my life. Today, I stood taller." The internet, often loud with hate, was now filled with something rare - respect, but far away. The journalist who had tried to embarrass Sundar sat in a newsroom full of whispers. His phone buzzed, not with praise, but with warnings. His boss had seen the clip. The network had received complaints. His moment of fame was crumbling. Meanwhile, Keanu and Sundar received an invitation they hadn't expected from the White House, a request for a closed-door conversation with the President's Tech and Education Council. Someone, up high, had seen more than just a clip. They had seen an opportunity, but not everyone was happy about it. In a corner office in New York, a powerful executive watched the video with tight lips. His company had long competed with Sundar's. He saw this sudden attention not as a story of kindness, but as a threat. "He's building something bigger," the executive muttered, "and I won't let him take the spotlight." He picked up his phone. "Get me Mark. I have a job for him." Rain tapped gently on the windows. as Sundar sat in a quiet room, reviewing the latest updates on the My Voice Counts platform. It had been just 2 weeks, but already over 400,000 voices had been recorded. Stories were coming in from everywhere: farmers, students, nurses, grandmothers, refugees. Some shared in perfect English, others in soft broken words, each one carrying truth. Layla had recovered quickly after the break-in. With Sundar's help, she rebuilt her entire system in a week. Maya began editing the first short documentary, using real voice clips from the platform. They were preparing to release it at a global youth summit. The goal was clear: give the unheard a voice, and make the world listen. But unknown to them, trouble had already begun to move in the shadows. Mark, the same journalist who had mocked Sundar, now sat across from the media executive in New York. His face was pale, lips tight, pride injured from the backlash he'd received. "You want me to fix my mistake?" he asked. The executive leaned forward. "No, I want you to double down. Make people doubt Sundar's project. Create questions, rumors. Call it emotional manipulation, foreign influence, anything that'll slow it down." Mark hesitated. "They're just sharing voices." "That's what makes it dangerous," the executive said. "Truth spreads fast when it's personal, faster than fear. And we've been selling fear for years." Back in California, Sundar and Keanu met again. They had just received the invitation to speak at the Global Youth Summit in Geneva. Sundar looked at Keanu and said, "I never imagined we'd be standing on a world stage for this." Keanu chuckled softly. "Sometimes, the quietest voices are the ones the world needs most. We just helped people believe that." Meanwhile, Maya played a rough cut of the first documentary. It opened with a girl in Afghanistan, standing near a dusty road, saying, "I want to build things, like Sundar. I want to make my village shine." Then it showed a man in a wheelchair in Italy, a child in Uganda, and a mother in Korea, each speaking in their voice, their way. The room was silent when the clip ended. "This is it," Layla whispered. "This is what hope sounds like." But that same day, headlines began to change. Is Sundar Pichai using emotion to build influence? Keanu Reeves gets political. Should actors stay in their lane? New platform may risk user privacy, say experts. Mark had done his job. Blogs, news channels, and even podcasts were suddenly filled with doubt. The documentary was labeled too emotional. Some claimed it was propaganda. Some said it would fail. Sundar's inbox was flooded with warnings. Sponsors pulled out. The summit organizers requested a delay, but Keanu, he didn't flinch. He walked into the press room with Maya, asked for 10 minutes of airtime, and faced the cameras. "Let me tell you a story," he said, eyes calm, voice even. He spoke of his childhood, how he stuttered, how people laughed, how one teacher told him, "You'll never be on stage." But years later, he stood on the biggest stages in the world, not because he shouted, but because he stayed. "This isn't about politics," he said. "This is about every child who thinks they don't matter because they don't sound perfect. We're not building a platform, we're building mirrors, so they can finally see they are enough." The clip aired on a late-night show. Millions watched it, but the damage wasn't undone. A well-known senator demanded an investigation into the platform. Online trolls swarmed Leela's account. Maya received threats. Even Keanu's team warned him to back away. But Sundar stood tall at their next meeting and said, "This is what progress looks like. We push, they push back. We get up again." Keanu smiled. "You know, for a quiet guy, you sound like a warrior." Layla opened a new laptop. "They can't stop us. I just moved the platform onto a decentralized server. Even if they shut it down here, it'll live on in every country that has access." Maya added, "And I've already sent copies of the documentary to 40 human rights groups. If we fall loud." But they wouldn't fall, because the next voice to speak wasn't a voice anyone expected. It was the president. The world froze when the president's official account posted a simple message on social media. I watched the My Voice Counts documentary tonight. It reminded me of my mother's voice, soft, proud, and the reason I never gave up. Voices like these must be heard, always. In just 5 minutes, the post was shared over 100,000 times. By morning, that number had crossed 10 million. Major news networks began reporting on it. Celebrities, educators, and even rival tech leaders added their support publicly. The tide had turned. At the same time, Sundar, Keanu, Layla, and Maya sat quietly in a small meeting room in Geneva. They were preparing for the youth summit, which was now back on after the president's message reignited interest. Maya's phone buzzed. It was a call from a teacher in South Africa. Our whole class watched the film. The teacher said, her voice shaking with emotion. One of our students. He'd never spoken out loud in front of the class. Today, he stood and said, "My voice counts too." We all cried. Thank you. Maya held the phone away from her face, tears forming in her eyes. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly. Sundar looked at her and said, "This is why we started. Not for praise. For moments like that." But trouble wasn't gone. In New York, the executive who had plotted to take down the project wasn't done yet. His media group had invested billions into a rival platform focused only on data, speed, and profits. No emotion, no stories, just results. To him, the rise of a human-centered movement, like My Voice Counts, wasn't just a threat. It was war. He called his lawyers and said, "Dig into every line of their platform. Find something, anything. If we can't beat them with headlines, we'll bury them in lawsuits." And Mark, the journalist who had started it all, was watching from the sidelines. He hadn't expected things to turn out like this. His name had become a meme. People called him the man who got humbled. His job was on thin ice, but what truly changed him was a message he got late at night. It was from his younger brother. "I saw what you did to that man," the message read, "and it hurt me, because I have the same accent. And every time I speak, I wonder if you're laughing at me too." Mark stared at the screen for a long time. He turned off his phone and sat alone in his apartment, haunted by what he had become. Back in Geneva, the summit began. The hall was packed. Leaders from over 70 countries sat in the audience. Students from every continent filled the rows. Flags, languages, and hope filled the room. Sundar was the first to speak. He didn't use slides. He didn't give a flashy speech. He simply told a story about a boy who grew up sharing a single radio with his neighbors, who stood in line for water, who studied by dim lights and dreamed silently. A boy who never thought he'd stand in a room like this. And now, he was helping others rise. "Our voices matter," he said. "Not because they are loud, but because they carry truth." When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then applause broke out, not loud and wild, but respectful, deep, real. Then came Keanu. He walked to the stage slowly, hands in his pockets. "When I was a teenager," he began, "someone told me, 'You'll never be enough.' I believed them for a while. Then one day, I stopped listening. I listened to my own voice instead." He paused. "This platform doesn't need defending, because it's already working. If a young girl in Brazil dares to speak, if a boy in Kenya tells his story, if an old man in Poland finds the courage to share, then we've already won." He stepped down, and for the first time that day, the audience stood in ovation. But the moment wasn't over. Layla took the stage last. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes were firm. "When I was 12, someone told me girls from my village should cook, not code. Today, I stand here not to prove them wrong, but to remind every girl who's told you can't, that you can." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but that crack was strength. She received the longest applause of the day. After the summit, thousands signed up to contribute to my voice counts. Engineers volunteered to improve the platform. Translators offered to add more languages. Even governments reached out, offering support. But as the team returned to California, a storm was waiting. One night, Sundar opened his email to find a legal notice. The powerful executive's company had filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit claiming code theft, privacy violations, and platform manipulation. The message was clear: shut down, or face ruin. Leel. A went pale. This could destroy us. Maya looked angry. They're scared of what we're building. Keanu stood up slowly. Then maybe it's time we stop being quiet. But Sundar raised his hand gently. We'll fight this, but not with hate, not with noise. He looked out the window, eyes calm but sharp. We'll fight this with the one thing they don't understand. What? Maya asked. Truth, Sundar said, and then something happened they didn't expect. Mark showed up at their door. The knock at the door was soft. Sundar looked up from the legal documents spread across the table. Leela was in the corner, reading the latest email from their lawyers. Maya sat with her laptop, editing another voice clip. Keanu had just stepped out for coffee when Sundar opened the door. He froze. Mark stood there, the same journalist who had mocked him on live TV, the man whose voice had once sliced through the room like a blade, filled with pride and ignorance. But now, Mark looked like someone else entirely. His shoulders were slouched, his eyes were heavy. He held no phone, no mic, no press badge, just a small notebook in his hand and a deep regret in his eyes. Can I speak to you? He asked. Sundar didn't reply for a moment. The silence stretched. Then he stepped aside and let Mark in. Maya looked up, startled. Leela stared, unsure. No one said a word. Mark sat down slowly. I came to say sorry, he said. Not for the cameras, not for a headline. Just as a human being who did something deeply wrong. Sundar remained quiet. Mark continued. When I mocked your accent that day, it wasn't about you. It was about me, my insecurities, my hunger for attention. And I didn't just hurt you. I hurt millions who saw themselves in you. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the notebook on the table. I want to help. I know the people who filed the lawsuit. I know what they're afraid of. And I have proof that this whole thing is built on lies. I saved something I wasn't supposed to. Emails, call records, strategy notes. Leela's eyes widened. Are you saying you can help us clear our name? She asked softly. Mark nodded. Yes, and more than that, I want to help rebuild what I helped break. Maya studied his face. Why now? Mark looked at her. Because my little brother stopped talking to me. Because my mother told me she was ashamed of what I did. And because I watched your film last night, twice. The room was silent. Not with doubt, but with something else. Forgiveness, Sundar finally spoke. We don't need perfect people. We need honest ones. Thank you for coming back. Just then Keanu returned. He looked at Mark, then at Sundar. We good here? Sundar smiled slightly. We're better than good. Within hours, the legal team got to work. Using the evidence Mark provided, they filed a counterclaim. The powerful executive's entire case began to crumble. Journalists exposed the smear campaign. Government officials opened an ethics investigation against the executive's company, and the lawsuit. It was dropped in 72 hours. But the team didn't stop there. They launched the next version of My Voice Counts, bigger, stronger, and more protected than ever. It featured voice tools for those who couldn't speak, emotional tone readers to empower children with speech delays, and language filters so no one felt left out. Millions joined. The platform became a space of healing, courage, and hope. It was used in schools to teach respect, in therapy sessions to guide emotional release, even in courts to allow victims to speak without fear. But most important of all, it changed lives. A young girl, in a remote village, recorded her first ever story. An old man who had lost his wife sang a lullaby he used to hum to her. A refugee shared how she survived and what kept her going. Each voice echoed across continents, not as noise, but as meaning. Then came the final moment. The United Nations invited Sundar, Keanu, Leela, my and, yes, even Mark to present their work in front of world leaders. They walked into the hall together, no suits, no show, just humans. Sundar spoke first. He didn't talk about success. He spoke about silence, and how sometimes the loudest power sits inside the quietest people. Keanu read a few lines from the voices that had come in, each one more moving than the last. Maya shared a video of a deaf child who had used the platform's emotion recognition to express joy for the first time. Leela ended with a sentence that moved the room to tears. "We didn't teach the world to speak," she said. "We just gave it permission." The applause that followed was not wild or forced. It was soft, long, and full of meaning. And as they left the stage, Mark turned to Sundar and whispered, "Thank you for not turning me away." Sundar smiled and replied, "Thank you for coming back." Outside, the world was still noisy, fast, impatient, but somewhere in a small town, a mother smiled as her child pressed the record button and said, "My voice counts." And that was enough. It had been 1 year since Sundar stood on that stage and answered a cruel question with calm dignity. 1 year since Keanu Reeves stepped forward with quiet courage. 1 year since a movement was born, not in anger, but in kindness. The My Voice Counts platform had reached 100 countries. In schools, children used it to practice speaking without fear. In hospitals, patients used it to express pain they couldn't put into words. In refugee shelters, the elderly told stories no one had ever heard before. More than a platform, it had become a global heartbeat. In a sunlit office in California, Sundar sat with Keanu, Leela, Maya, and Mark. The team was small, but their work echoed across oceans. A message had just come in from the Nobel Foundation. The project had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Maya dropped her pen. Leela gasped. Keanu chuckled softly. "Well, that's unexpected." Sundar, ever calm, smiled. "Recognition is not why we started. But if this helps the message grow, we'll accept it with grace." Mark stood by the window. He had rebuilt his life from the ground up, writing honest journalism now, covering stories of resilience and human courage, and today he had news of his own. "My brother spoke to me last week," Mark said quietly. "He told me he was proud of me. Said he shared our platform with his entire school." Everyone turned toward him. He smiled faintly. It meant everything. In the weeks that followed, the world continued to change. In a small island nation, the government launched a national storytelling program using the voice platform. In Japan, a new law was passed requiring all AI learning systems to include global voice diversity. In Morocco, an education startup used the platform to teach empathy through real voices. And then came the final test. A global crisis struck. A powerful cyber attack hit major tech infrastructures across the globe. Databases went dark. Communication lines crashed. But in the middle of the chaos, My Voice Counts remained active. Why? Because Leela had designed it with decentralization in mind. It didn't rely on one server or one power. It lived in the hearts of thousands who admired its students, teachers, volunteers, dreamers. It was the people's platform, and in the darkest hours, it became the world's light. Parents used it to reach out to family. Leaders used it too. Send calm messages to their nations. Children used it to tell each other, "Don't be afraid. We're together." The ripple had become a wave. The Nobel ceremony took place in Norway. Sundar wore a simple gray suit. Keanu wore his signature black. Leela wore a dress stitched by her mother. Maya carried the voice of a child who had passed away. His recording had changed thousands of lives. Mark stood in the back row. He didn't want the spotlight. He had had enough of that once. Sundar gave the acceptance speech. He didn't speak of himself. He spoke of the little boy in a village who whispered into a mic, "Can anyone hear me?" And then he smiled and said, "Yes, we hear you." Keanu stepped forward next. He looked at the audience, quiet and full of meaning. "This world doesn't need more noise," he said. "It needs more listening." When the ceremony ended, people didn't rush out. They stayed. They hugged. They talked softly because they had been changed. And in homes around the world, millions replayed that moment. But the final scene wasn't on stage. It was in a school in Chennai. A teacher played the first ever clip. Sundar had uploaded the one where he read a poem in broken English as a boy. A young student raised his hand. "Miss," he asked, "do I have to speak perfectly?" The teacher smiled. "No, child," she said. "You only have to speak. The world will listen." And far away, Sundar stood on his balcony, watching the stars. He didn't need to be loud. He had already been heard.